Our video earlier this month delved into what they aren't telling you about World War III. And as you can probably imagine, it's in the best interest of your government to really downplay your country's involvement in an escalating conflict. But still, Ukraine is not the only front of this rapidly expanding world war. In this video, we're going to explore the 6 potential causes that could lead to an outright world war and 6 hot zones that you should be paying attention to. You're going to want to watch to the end to understand the threat completely so you can understand your country's role in a future potential conflict. Now, these are the 6 likely sparks that could ignite a more significant global war in the 6 areas where the conflict could occur. And I'm barely even touching upon the South China Sea or Ukraine. Before we dive into these conflict zones, let's start off by looking at what could be the causes behind World War III kicking off. Number 1. Sanctions don't work. In 2008, Russia engaged in a military conflict with Georgia, resulting in the imposition of some sanctions. This event served as a test to gauge international response, but no substantial actions were taken by the rest of the world. Russia is involved in a similar situation with Ukraine, leading to sanctions being issued by the UN, USA, NATO, and EU. However, despite these sanctions, they invaded Ukraine in 2014 and are currently engaged in a special operation that is now extended into year 2. The sanctions this time were even more extreme. However, Russia has circumnavigated many of them by selling to other nations through a shadowy fleet of vessels, grain gifts to Africa, weapons deals with North Korea, oil and grain and contractor deals with China and India. The list, it goes on and on. When sanctions lose effectiveness, it gives rise to other reserve currencies and creates a multipolar world where the new alliances are formed. Russia is already replenishing its foreign reserves with the Chinese yuan. Already, Indian refineries are paying tenders in the United Arab Emirates dirhams for Russian oil. When sanctions cease to work, new alliances and sides are established. Potential conflicts can escalate. Number 2. More hot zones. At any given time worldwide, there are numerous conflicts. Most don't receive our attention. However, each of these minor conflicts is a pawn on a chessboard. They may not be growing into a global conflict, but they bring forces in global opposition to one another in close proximity. Russia and U.S. forces are overtly and covertly present in Syria, Sudan, Libya, and several other countries worldwide. Wherever oppositionally aligned superpowers are mutually deployed as consultants or peacekeepers, the potential for armed interaction exists. This is probably the hottest at the moment in Syria, where pro-Iranian and Russian forces are threatening and attacking U.S.-supported positions. One sure sign of World War III is an explosion of hot zones and their escalation of conflict. Number 3. Private military groups. Believe it or not, wars have some generally accepted rules of engagement, like the Geneva Conventions. Now, the way around these rules is by establishing a state-funded private military group. Academia, Wagner Group, United Resources Group, NVM Incorporated, and Asgard are just a few of the many. These are militaries that function as loosely constructed corporations. Their profit comes from waging war, defending assets, or supporting other countries or rebel forces. The problem with these is that even though they may be tied back to the governments and espionage agencies that created and funded them, the countries have a layer of plausible deniability. So, we see these PMGs murdering, torturing, and plundering worldwide. We're also seeing these competing forces coming into closer proximity with each other and conducting operations in the same geographical space. It's just a matter of time before oppositionally aligned PMGs come into direct conflict with each other and force countries to respond militarily with their standing armies. Number 4. Nuclear anything. Nuclear warheads are still seen in the world as a line too far and not to be crossed. While we tend to see only the outcome of some countries using a nuclear warhead as a complete global nuclear exchange and the end of us all, there are other scenarios. If Russia uses a nuclear warhead not delivered via a missile, nuclear signatures must be established to trace it back to the source of origin. That takes time, while countries immediately go to their equivalent of DEFCON 2. During that pressure cooker time, to prevent further launches by a hostile government, a high-altitude nuclear detonation from space, resulting in an EMP to wipe out electronics in a country, is possible. Such a counterattack is more challenging to pinpoint a country of origin, so the conflict can escalate rapidly from there and devolve into nuclear chaos. Whether it's a leak from a nuclear power plant, a dirty bomb, or the detonation of a nuclear warhead, nuclear anything immediately pulls the entire world into World War III. Number 5. Borders and boundaries violated. Any invasion in our modern world is sure to bring a global response. Whether that's China attacking Taiwan, or a contested island owned by the Japanese, or Russia invading Ukraine, or an escalation of the border war between China and India. These violations of accepted international borders and boundaries can pull the whole world into a conflict. The traditional way is with armed forces like Germany sending 20,000 troops into the Rhineland in 1936, but modern border and boundary violations are far more complex. Japan, South Korea, and China are in dispute over airspace. Russia is attacking U.S. drones in the international airspace of the Black Sea. Fighters and bombers are violating airspace in the Bering Strait in Syria. These are continued maritime disputes between China and every other country sharing a shoreline with the South China Sea and the Pacific Ocean. We have seen spy balloons flying over the sovereign territory of other nations. Most of these incursions and infractions are testing response times, saber rattling, and posturing. Each of them, however, has the potential to draw forces into a conflict that could turn from a minor fire to a blazing wildfire in very little time. As forces realign themselves around the world, the potential for more significant conflict from their flexing of muscle increases. Watch for any major border or boundary violation as a potential catalyst for World War III. Number 6. Economics. The only thing probably keeping the peace in the world right now boils down to simple economics. So long as China is dependent upon U.S. consumers, so long as China and India both benefit from lucrative Russian grain, energy, and defense deals, so long as OPEC benefits from Russian oil and so forth, relative peace is maintained. No country wants to rock the boat when it comes to their economies. That said, as BRICS develop and rolls out its own digital currency, as the Middle East continues to profit from Russian oil contributions, and as European countries continue to replace Russian energy with energy exported from the US, these power dynamics can swiftly change. As these power dynamics change, global policies and alliances change. A China-Russia alliance without limits will create a very different world what we are currently living in today. Trade wars, tariffs, and sanctions can all lead to violations of long-standing treaties and alliances. The first volley in a world war is often economic, so it's something to keep an eye on. 6 places where World War III could happen. Here are some potential hot zone areas beyond Ukraine and the South China Sea where we could see a world war spin up in a matter of weeks. I'm not going to cover Ukraine or the South China Sea because I cover both those areas quite extensively in other videos on this channel. The potential conflict between China and Japan is, at present, probably more concerning than China's threat to Taiwan's independence. I'm also not including potential areas that aren't as hot right now, like Russia's border with Finland or the Suwalki Corridor, which connects Belarus to Kaliningrad and Russia and would cut off ballistic states from NATO with the Bering Strait. These are all potential starting points for World War III, but they could require some build-up compared to the zones that I'm outlining here. Number 1. Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz, known in Arabic as Madik Bab Salam with a door of peace, is a narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the ocean. The countries bordering the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf include Iran, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. The strait is an important strategic location for international trade due to its significant role in facilitating the passage of approximately 1/3 of the world's liquefied natural gas and nearly 25% of the total global oil consumption. The US and Iran have had several minor conflicts since Operation Praying Mantis, a one-day battle against Iranian forces in retaliation for a US frigate striking a mine. Even though conflicts are continuing in these waters, Iran has recently begun seizing foreign vessels. On April 27th, Iran seized the Marshall Islands flagged Advantage Sweep in the Gulf of Oman while it was in transit. Subsequently, 6 days later, another ship, the Panama flagged tanker Niavi, was seized in Iran as it departed a dry dock in Dubai. In early December, an Iranian patrol boat attempted to temporarily blind U.S. Navy ships in the Strait of Hormuz by directing a spotlight towards them and crossing within a distance of 150 yards. Similarly, in August of last year, an Iranian vessel captured a crewless American military research vessel in the Gulf, but it was released after the deployment of a U.S. Navy patrol boat and helicopter to the location. With Iran's overt support of Russia in the Ukraine war and Russia's warming up to Iran as an adversary to the United States, a sudden escalation of the conflict in the zone may be inevitable. Number 2. Gulf of Aden, Red Sea. Probably the biggest threat in the past in the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea area was, perhaps, poorly equipped Somali pirates. With the ocean to the south and the Suez Canal connecting the waterway to the north to the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, one of the world's ancient waterways, is gaining growing geopolitical significance. Positioned between 2 continents, it borders 6 African and 4 Middle Eastern countries, serving as a crucial passage for approximately 10% of global trade. It holds strategic importance for regional and international powers, projecting their military strength or involvement in conflicts, and presents a potential for both prosperity and peril. As economic and military competition intensifies in the Red Sea, it carries the prospect of a robust economic growth while also signaling the likelihood of conflicts between rival powers. Most recently, the Wagner Group has established a presence to protect Russian gold interests in Sudan. Investigations are underway uncovering a smuggling operation by Russia to take Sudanese gold directly to Russia. There's also been an effort on the Kremlin's part to establish a naval base on Sudan's coast with the Red Sea. As this would have required Sudanese parliamentary approval, which was perhaps too complex for Russia to obtain, is it any surprise that a civil war between two generals, both supported by Russia, has broken out? Number 3. Sudan. Over the past 2 decades, Sudan has been marked by significant conflicts that have profoundly impacted its society. The Darfur conflict began in 2003 and resulted in widespread violence and displacement as rebel groups clashed with the government over marginalization and resource control. The North-South Sudan Civil War, lasting from 1983 to 2005, stemmed from ethnic and religious divisions, ultimately leading to the independence of South Sudan. Meanwhile, conflicts in South Kordofan, Blue Nile, Abyei, and Eastern Sudan have caused ongoing violence, displacement, and tensions over political status, resources, and ethnic grievances. These conflicts have brought immense human suffering and continue to pose challenges to achieving lasting peace and stability in Sudan. In this latest chapter, 2 military factions, once political allies, now battlefield adversaries, are wrestling for control over the city and the country's lucrative mineral resource exports, especially gold. Several countries, including United Nations countries, Egypt, Russia, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Nigeria, and the United States, all have military assets in the country operating in close proximity to one another as the latest chapter of violence unfolds. Further escalation of the conflict would result in multiple warships tightly packed into the waters of the Red Sea, a recipe for disaster. Number 4. Syria. Syria has been experiencing a complex and multifaceted conflict that began in 2011. The conflict involves multiple parties, including the Syrian government, rebel groups, extremist organizations, and international actors. It has resulted in significant humanitarian crisis, including mass displacement, casualties, and destruction of infrastructure. Efforts for a political resolution and peace negotiations have been ongoing, but the situation remains highly volatile. The president of Syria is Bashar al-Assad. He assumed office in July of 2000, succeeding his father, Hasif al-Assad, who has been in power since 1971. The ongoing Syrian conflict has marked Bashar al-Assad's presidency. Without delving too deeply into the conflict, Bashar al-Assad is supported by Russia and the U.S. has troops in the country. Since the start of the Ukrainian war, there has been an escalation of the conflict on Russia's part. They've attempted to bait U.S. jets into a dogfight and have repeatedly buzzed U.S. defensive positions in neutral zones of the conflict. While Russia and the United States support forces on opposite sides of the Syrian conflict and are both allegedly fighting Islamic State militants, U.S. and Russian troops have not clashed directly, but that could change overnight. This dangerous hot zone would provide Russia with another front to distract the world from its invasion and war in Ukraine. Number 5. Korean Peninsula. North Korea continues to launch missiles in its direction and over the airspace of their neighbors. North Korea reportedly fired 26 projectiles, including short-range and intercontinental ballistic missiles, over 11 test launches in the first 3 months of this year. North Korea has a military nuclear weapons program, and as of early 2020, is estimated to have an arsenal of approximately 30 to 40 nuclear weapons and sufficient production of fissile material for 6 to 7 nuclear weapons per year. Kim Jong-un desires to be taken seriously and feared. Traditionally, China has held some sway over the dictator, but that has changed since North Korea started focusing so heavily on its nuclear program. North Korea is also heavily supporting Moscow in its war with Ukraine. If relations between China and Russia become strained or China feels that its control is slipping away to Russia, North Korea will turn towards Moscow for more significant support. That does not bode well for the world. Number 6. China, India. Kind of like that ace hid deep within the deck, and probably more in the category of a lukewarm conflict, the China-India border conflict remains one to watch as a potential World War III maker. The sporadic conflict between China and India in the mountainous region of the roof of the world continues, with both countries showing no signs of backing down. Although the territorial stakes are small and the terrain inhospitable, the conflict persists due to the importance of national prestige. The leaders of both nations have been unable to find a resolution, leaving open the possibility of escalation, which could either achieve their objectives or lead to a more devastating conflict. So long as both India and China are profiting from lucrative deals in cheap oil and grain from Russia, the economies will prevent a larger escalation in this area. Both countries will ride the fence on many significant issues worldwide and close deals with the United States and Russia. Still, it's a vital zone to monitor for changes, as they are nuclear-capable nations with 35% of the world's population. There are so many conflict zones right now where proxy wars are being actively waged, and it's almost like a dress rehearsal for the future. The war in Ukraine is the most apparent global proxy war, but there are several fronts from Sudan to Syria, which the mainstream media probably isn't giving too much attention to on right now. They could all, however, ignite into more significant conflicts. Many, myself included, would argue that we're already engaged in a world war. You're always best served to prepare as if war is imminent, as there are many hotspots around the world currently on the verge of turning into a fire. I'll post links to some practical videos that get you moving in your preparedness journey to really insulate yourself should these events ramp up further. As always, stay safe out there.